Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining. We're waiting for additional people to join our Scan, Monitor, Encrypt, Monetize live webinar. Here with me is Louis Pop, the head nerd of Enable. We're just waiting for additional people to join us. We'll take another minute or two for people to join, and then we'll kick off our discussion this morning. Thank you for joining. We'll start in a minute. We're waiting for a few additional people to join, and we'll kick off our session for this morning. So thank you everyone for joining, and good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Scan, Monitor, Encrypt, and Monetize live webinar, where we will show you how to create new equation that will generate more growth for you. I'm very happy to have as our special guest this morning, together with me, Louis Pop, the head nerd of Enable. Thank you very much, Louis, for joining. Maybe a few words of introduction from your side.
Yes, thank you for inviting me, Guy. So I'm Louis Pope, one of the head nerds at Enable. My role at Enable is to be partner education, advocacy, empowerment, but it's not just for our partners, it's also for the larger MSP channel. Former MSP myself, I've been on the MSP side for about 6 years before I came to Enable for the past 6 years. My focus is on security, compliance, and best practices, very much the practical implementation of security controls. How do you get all of the dirty work done?
Excellent. And my name is Guy Bavly, and I'm one of the co-founders and the CEO of Actifile, the data security platform for MSPs that will help you scan, monitor, encrypt, and eventually monetize new services. So I want to kick off the discussion by, first of all, giving you a peek at our agenda. We'll talk about challenges and opportunities, starting with threats and trends. Then we'll talk about how you can improve and leverage and take a step further your end customers relationship vis-a-vis data security. We'll talk about tools and solutions. And finally, we'll end up with how MSPs grow with Actifile. As usual,
starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Yeah. So, of course, please feel free to ask questions on the chat. We'll try to answer them during the meeting, and we'll make sure that we'll answer all of them by the end of the meeting. And with no further ado, I want to start by looking at the threats and trends. And I think, Louis, we talked about it earlier this week, and when we met at the Empower event a couple of weeks ago. So I think there is, first of all, some kind of clarification in place between the differentiation between data protection, data security, and business continuity. So what's your take on that?
Right. So there's, for the most part, it doesn't matter what industry you're in, what you're talking about. Not everybody's going to be using the exact same vocabulary. So I always think it's worth taking the time to make sure people are on the same page whenever they're talking about data protection, data security and business continuity, because these are all different things. Data protection, whenever you talk to a lot of MSPs, the first thing that comes to mind is, oh, backups, data protection. And that's kind of like everything that encompasses it. Then you'll have somebody that will talk about, they'll reference data security, and they may still be talking simply about backups or whenever, or business continuity. A lot of times whenever people use any of those terms, they're using it in reference to having backups of data, securely backing up that data, and being able to restore that data as part of business continuity or disaster recovery efforts. Not often do they use those words, and they're actually talking about security of the data at rest or in use, in production, in the environment. So it's always worth, defining that and really driving home for MSPs that just as much as it is your responsibility to make sure that you're doing good backups and you're giving your clients good business continuity plans and disaster recovery plans, that you also have to be concerned with data security as well, the data when it's in use in the environment.
I completely agree, and we'll talk about it in the next bullet items. But it's also important that we not just talk about acronyms like data protection and data security, but talk about threat vectors and actual use cases. So when data is deleted or mistakenly or maliciously, then definitely what you need is a good backup restore situation. When, God forbid, there is an earthquake and your data center is down, then definitely you need business continuity. It's not just the data itself, it's all the infrastructure that you have in place should be restored quickly in order for your customers to continue working, or if there is some kind of a ultimate catastrophe. But data security is, as you said, Luis, it's focused on the data itself. And first and foremost, if you're going to protect something, if you're going to secure something, you need to know where it is, how much risk is associated with that, how is it flowing in and out of the organization. And eventually, and we'll talk about it in a minute, there are use cases like ransomware stealing data where your backup will not help because the data is gone. Somebody took it with him. So it's not a case of someone actually double encrypting those files. So definitely there's room for data protection, there's room for business continuity, and then definitely there's basis for data security as part of the overall compliance and data governance, procedures of the organization. So if we're talking about data security threats, and you're of course meeting a lot of MSPs across events and webinars, and you're talking with a lot of them on a regular basis, what are you seeing in the market right now, and how are those threats evolving over time?
So it was only maybe 5-7 years ago, the biggest concerns that a lot of clients of MSPs had was on the recovery side. It was like, if something happens, we need to be able to recover our data and continue to operate. But the threats now, not only the threats, but also the regulations have changed. There is the New York Shield, there's the California data privacy, and data privacy legislation in general is popping up everywhere.
Yeah.
And that's kind of forcing the hand of businesses. Now they're basically being told that, no, you have to care about this now. You can't ignore it and only be concerned about it once you're breached, once something happens. You have to be putting in practices and policies and procedures to demonstrate due care and due diligence, that you were securely handling and processing this sensitive data that you're collecting. So it's a combination of the threats that are evolving that are now about data exfiltration, more so than they are about ransomware attacks. There was the continuing unfolding escapades of everything that's happening with the recent United Health ransomware attack. data exfiltration was a part of that attack. And apparently, no confirmation on this, but the Bitcoin addresses say otherwise, that money was paid. And then after money was paid, eventually a couple of weeks later, another new, may not have necessarily been new, but somebody operating under a new name popped up and said, hey, Change Healthcare, we have all of this data, pay us. So it was one of those situations that now that data was exfiltrated, you have to pay for the ransomware, and then now you have to pay for the exploitation attack. But also that's kind of, proving the point to regulators and legislators that, hey, just because you paid that extortion money doesn't mean the data was actually deleted. So that's becoming more and more of a, well, there's no guarantee, so that's not a valid approach. You can't rely on that to be a valid approach. There are also threat actors now, wasn't even a few months after the new SEC 8K filing regulation. So if you're a publicly traded company and you experience a cyber incident that results in material impact to your business, you're supposed to file an SEC 8-K form within, I think it's 72 hours. Somebody had an incident. They did not file that 8K filing. The threat actor group notified the SEC that we hacked these people, we have their information, and they didn't file that like they were supposed to. Go get them. The threat actors, it's becoming more, they're more savvy now. It's actually, the tactics and techniques that are being used to do the compromise, to obtain that data in the first place, that's not changing that much. It's what they're doing once they have that data now. That's starting to change up a little bit more than what it has been. For the longest time, it was just we'll ransom you, pay us money to unransom, and pay us to delete the data. Now they're getting creative in how they're using that double extortion, how they're applying additional pressure to make sure that they're getting those payouts.
Yeah, and you're right. They're becoming more and more, sophisticated, and eventually the threats are, as always, external and internal. So we're talking about the ransomware and external threats, which are, have evolved to steal the data and damage the reputation of the organization, damage the productivity of the organization, loss of customers, which is by far a secondary bigger risk than the actual, incident response cost that will, you have to put in place. Compound that with the fact it's not just the regulation. I think, Louis, you're hearing it more and more that the cyber insurance renewals are becoming more and more difficult. So premiums are higher, coverage is lower, they're asking more and more questions, and many questions are involving the data, because I think the cyber insurance carriers have understood finally that even if you have the best, let's call it perimeter security tools, you've got your SOC, you've got your SIEM, you've got your EDR, you've got all of that. All of them are valid and should be in place, but eventually, if there is a compromise, and there will be a compromise because we're all people, then if you have no clue about your data, where it is, who's using it, where is it going to, and you're not preemptively securing that, and we'll talk about it later on, then how can you protect something you don't know of? So part of the threat, the way I see it, is not just the external, players, it's the internal users that exfiltrate all the time and, expose you, and your own procedural, actions, putting all of your faith in perimeter security, while not knowing what's going on in terms of your data inside your organization. It's like owning a jewelry store without knowing how much inventory at any given time of jewels you have in order to adjust your cyber insurance. So what are you seeing, Louis, in terms of challenges and best practices for MSPs that I think most of our clients at any given time work remote or hybrid work mode, home and office. Is this putting more pressure on the topic of data and the potential, security of it?
Right. And it's always been a challenge, but yes, the work from home, the everything, more stuff, more workloads, work moving to the cloud, more work that's being done without those strong perimeter defenses in the first place now. That has changed up the game. And it's a challenge, just the first step of that discovery. That is if you're not using a tool to achieve it, and you're trying to go through the old-fashioned way of, well, let me look through the folders, let me look through the databases, what do we have? That's not a process that scales. It's a challenge. You don't have the time and the bandwidth to do it that way. You need some way of automating discovery. So that's the first challenge. And because that is such a challenge, it's the discovery phase, so much gets missed. There is so much about the business processes and the business workflows of the client of an MSP that if you as the MSP are not aware of, if you do not know about it, your clients can be doing some very, very bad behaviors with how they're handling data. My horror story was whenever I was with my original MSP, small CPA firm. They had seasonal workers that would come in for tax season. They were completely fine with those seasonal workers coming in, doing OCR scans of tax documents, and then copy pasting those that information into their tax management platform. And then those OCR scans were just sitting around in their scanned documents folder for years. And that was one of those things that I didn't know that's how they did it. I thought the CPAs would be smarter than that. But that was one of those things that until I went and used you went and used a commercial tool to do a grep style discovery on the devices of, all right, scan these devices and tell me if you find any plain text, credit card, debit card, social security numbers, dates of birth, or driver's license numbers. That's all I was looking for. But that was enough for me to uncover this bad business workflow that they had that was introducing so many liabilities for them because they were not safely and appropriately handling this information, but also the risk exposure for myself, because as far as the client's concerned, that was my responsibility to take care of them and to make sure they weren't doing stupid things. So
especially when people are working, I fully agree, especially when people are working remotely and you've got, part-time employees, you need to not just monitor what they have on their machines, which is important. You also need to monitor what they're downloading to their machines. Again, I'm not saying maliciously, but unintentionally or part of their productivity, and then they're pushing it to all kind of shadow IT applications. So with the demise of the local area network, where there's no group of people sitting, working in an office, and you can either monitor them, personally, and or put, tools in place. When they're working in home, you need a solution to monitor the flow of the data in the context of their homework. So that's very important trend that we need to pay attention and adjust our data security schemas to that. So moving forward, how do you think you can help MSP? How can we help MSPs build trust regarding overall cybersecurity measures and data security? Because all the time, it's very hard to convince small and medium enterprises to invest more, to do more. So how do you do that in a way that helps them to build the trust?
I think the first thing you have to do as an MSP is just first, make sure you're not suffering from imposter syndrome, build up your confidence so you can walk into the room as the security professional, stand on your own 2 feet, and honestly not back down. You're not going to, if you go to the dentist, sit in the chair and tell the dentist how to pull your teeth, he's probably going to tell you to get out of his office. You're not going to tell the plumber whenever they come in, you know, which wrench you want them to use. They're going to use what they know they should be using. The same thing applies for you as an MSP. You need to go into the room as the professional, be sure of yourself, and be confident in what it is you're going to be saying. That's the first thing. That's a lot of soft skills, but it's one of the things you need to be able to do. And then it's like a practical, technical execution. Sit down with the clients and have that honest conversations with them about where their gaps are, what the consequences of their gaps are. You know, let them know that, hey, if you hit a ransomware attack and we have to rebuild your systems, this is what it's actually going to look like to get you back up. Let's talk about the fact that I don't know what you're doing. I don't know what your data flow is. I don't know if your data is being securely dealt with. I need to look into this. Or sometimes it's just as simple as doing the, you know, doing the discovery step of, all right, if you're already in a client's environment, and you already have your managed services agreement signed with them, you know, say, hey, do you mind if I do data discovery on your network? Or do you mind if I look around and perform a little security audit to see if I can find anything unusual? And, you know, use it as a loss lead. Get in, use a tool, do a quick scan, find those obvious quick hits so you can further the conversation of, I wasn't looking that hard and I found this. I think we need to look a little bit harder. Here's a contract, here's a project.
Yeah, and actually with tools like Actifile, you can convert what you can quantify the risk in US dollars. So I think your advice is gold. That what you need to do as an MSP, and we see that very successfully, you know, we've been executed by our MSP partners when they have a new prospect or they have an existing services customer, showing them the results of the data risk assessment. You don't just show them the number of files, the number of records. You also show them how much risk there is in US dollars. There is a framework, and this is effectively communicating. There is a standard framework in the market called FAIR, FAIR. Check it out, fair.org. It's a non-for-profit organization that does risk assessment in the world of IT, and they came up with benchmarks for how much each and every record, SSNs, medical records, credit cards, and so on, is potentially create damage based on thousands and thousands of breaches and data leakages and so on. So we convert your findings, number of records, the number of files, into a number per classification and overall the organization. And now you can move yourself from the position of an IT person that explains, you know, the vulnerabilities and the gaps that are, you know, hard to comprehend by a business person. You turn that into a discussion about business risk and how much is it in US dollars, which is a fair estimation. And now something magical happens, you know, instead of talking about technology, it's like someone acting as their appraiser, coming to them and you know, even as a loss lead, showing them the risk. Now, two things can happen. If they're highly negligent and you know, if they don't care, at least you show them and you have a proof that you made the effort. Most of them will say, okay, how do I do something with that? And then you move them into an ongoing monitoring. You actually secure their data with the means of encryption that a tool like Actifile can. So switch from an MSP to a virtual CIO, and you have a seat next to the table, not just you know, raising your hands and saying you need to install a patch or buy this or buy that. Reverse the conversation, talk about business risk, and then convert that to something that will justify the current investors and future investments in technology. So how do you continuously retain this client confidence? Do you see that as something one time or ongoing?
Yep. So You touched on one of my favorite current topics, virtual CISO roles. Even if you haven't discussed it and formalized it with your clients, most of your small and medium business clients probably already think of you as filling that vCISO role for them. And the danger with that, or how that used to, the most familiar way that manifests is in those situations that I imagine most of us have been in at some point, where something happens at a client, they get upset and say, well, I thought you were taking care of that. And your response back is, well, no, I wasn't. It wasn't in scope and you're not paying me to do it. So no, of course I wasn't taking care of it. But that's not the perception of clients. Most of the time, client perception is you're the computer people, you're taking care of everything associated with the computers. The new concept of the vCISO role, I think MSPs need to embrace that going forward, because it does give you that seat at the business table. You're no longer just a cost center that somebody at the table is trying to figure out how to shrink. You're at the table explaining why that needs to grow, making those justifications, helping your clients plan for the future. It is a harder conversation and a much different conversation to tell a client, hey, you have this software, it's going end of life in a year and a half. Let's go ahead and plan what we're going to do about that. That is an easier conversation to have than, oh, you have this piece of software that's been end of support for the past 3 years, but it's still working fine in your environment and it's still serving the business purpose, but I want to replace it and you need to buy a new license for a couple $1,000. Those are two completely different conversations. And if you're not there at the table, that's the kind of situations you end up finding yourself in, and you're having to swim harder against the currents, really, if you're not occupying that vCISO role.
Yeah, so the vCISO role is an ongoing role. It's not a one-time thing. And you can leverage your monthly or quarterly business reviews, and among other stuff that you're showing, how quickly and you're meeting the SLA of your help desk, how many incidents you had that you resolved, and so on. You can show them how their business risk is going up and down, and not just by showing them how much gaps and vulnerabilities. It doesn't say anything. It's like, again, if we're coming back to the jewelry store, we added another alarm, or we fixed the lock on the door. Okay, but if you talk and say, hey, your inventory has increased by 20% and we adjusted to it and now you have additional security in place, or you even say your inventory has gone down, so maybe we can take something out. All of those adaptations are expected of you, and moreover, they're expecting you to expect the unexpected. Okay, that's part of what you're saying, is that they see you as us, as the computer people, and you should find it out. So again, if something happens tomorrow morning, there was a breach, and you don't know how much data, the things that people care about are productivity, server down, and data being stolen, lost because of all the immediate and long-term consequences. So if you don't know how much data there is, and something unfortunate has happened, what can you do? You cannot show them a syslog or something like that. So
right. Yeah, and you're operating blind to a lot of things. It's device encryption is not data encryption. One of the things I kind of have to hammer on sometimes, and that's kind of a great example of, even if you lose an encrypted device, that doesn't mean that any data associated with it is still safe. If you lose a device, it's turned on and it's still connected to an internet connection, and the OS is loaded, all of that data on that device is unencrypted. It's readable. And if you're not going through the additional steps of encrypting the actual data, then that puts you in those scenarios of where you can't confidently say what data was there, what if it was or was not protected accurately. And whenever you can't make those statements that yes, it was protected, you start having to operate under the assumption of it wasn't protected, it's been breached, we've lost control over it, and we have to respond to it as such.
Yeah, I fully agree. So one good example is BitLocker that everybody have there on their Windows machine. BitLocker is a disk level encryption that helps you in case the computer was stolen. But once the computer is turned on and operating, then those files are not encrypted one by file level encryption. And then there's definitely something missing. So moving on from end customer relationships, let's talk about tools and solutions. So what strategies do you think MSPs can use to meet those diverse needs of the, you're an MSP, you have different customers, healthcare, financial, most MSPs have a very, broad range of verticals within their customer base, different sizes and so on. How do MSPs, adjust their services to those diverse needs of different clients?
So I'm a big proponent of you should be following an established cybersecurity framework. You as an MSP, though, you shouldn't be following it the same way that an internal IT department is going to be following it. An internal IT department is going to have it dictated to them by their vertical, by their industry, what frameworks, what standards they have to implement to. For MSPs, you could go through the trouble of building your services directed towards each one of those different types of industries, but then you wind up with 7 different ways of delivering your services. So I've always been a big proponent of, there's actually not as much difference between the different frameworks. There's not that much difference in the controls that they're asking for. And if you look at the mappings of any major frameworks or standards against each other, there's actually a lot that's in common. So for MSPs, I think there is a way and a path for you to build out your framework, your standards, your processes, your procedures, and have those as a baseline for all of your clients across the board, regardless of their industry. And then it makes it really, really easy for you to tailor then for just those individual little differences that might exist in the clients.
I fully agree. So adhering to NIST or adhering to ISO 27001 or not necessarily looking at the different regulations, because you're right, there's a big overlap between the regulations and there's big overlap between them and the specific security frameworks. But still, and I must admit, there are specific guidelines. For instance, HIPAA, we're all not aware of that. Up to 500 records stolen, it's not the case for someone to raise an alarm and so on. So there is a difference in how you handle regulations. What you need to do is, especially when it comes to diverse needs of customers in terms of data, you need a tool or a platform that will cater to all of those types. So from CUI, CMMC level to through PHI, EPHI, PII, and so on, and adjust to the different, specifics of each and every regulation on top of that, because there are differences. And especially if you're looking at, for instance, healthcare, it's a very good example. Eye doctor, you're looking for different classified information than a dentist or a dental clinic. And if you're trying to do with the same set of discovery rules both, then you end up with quite a few false positives. So you want to standardize, you want to stick with the major leading security frameworks, but make sure that you know that in terms of data, there are differences between the regulations and the different, requirements to adhere to each and every regulation. But
and that even changes state by state as well, because
exactly.
you probably your clients are probably relying on you to inform them, oh, if this happens and we do have a breach and data control over his data is lost, who do we have to call? Is it, do we have to call the Secretary of State? Do we have to report it to DHHS? Do we have to report it to the local FBI field office? There's all those additional kind of what do we do when that you have to tailor to it and make sure you have in place as well.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And one of the things that I know I hear quite a few comments from MSPs is balancing between strong cybersecurity measures with the need for user-friendly systems. It always it's quite an age-old dilemma, so to speak. What do you see? What do you hear? Especially talking with MSPs, where do they find themselves? How do they handle this challenge?
So one is just peerage. A lot of this is, nothing is brand new. None of this is something that somebody else hasn't already been through before. So there's a lot of, no need to reinvent the wheel. There are services out there that already exist that you can consume. There are tools out there that you can just grab and begin to leverage. I'm a very big proponent of what you do as an MSP should not be invisible. It should be unobtrusive, but you always need to be displaying and showing that you are there, you are providing value, work is being done. And if you're spending all your time and effort just trying to figure out how do I do this on the technical side, getting down and try to do custom tooling, you're probably not sticking your head up long enough to work on the business side of things to make sure that the value you are delivering is being recognized in a way that, again, isn't obtrusive or hurting your clients. And that gets up also into, the third-party vendors and the service providers that you use and you trust. You want to make sure that,
yeah. I think it's also kind of, and I'm talking on behalf of vendors at this point. I think vendors take for granted that they can put any type of strong security measures, and MSPs and IT departments will apply that, and users will be, coping with that. And I don't think that's the reality. I think IT in general and MSPs in particular, and I was, by the way, in my background, I was an IT manager, and eventually it doesn't stick. If it's not a user-friendly system, it will not stick. So one of the characteristics of Actifile, just as an example, is that we made sure that, yes, we are discovering, yes, we are tracking, but we are also encrypting preemptively the data. So the users themselves do not feel any change in the way they work. They've got Actifile, and those files are open to them seamlessly without a user, a password, or any type of latency. So this is a type of thinking in advance. It even works offline. You cannot ignore people, sitting on a plane, right? So it's something that I, as a vendor, say that we don't think as a security vendor enough about the implications of implementing the system. I'm not talking about the TCO, the TCO of the total cost of ownership from the admin side. I'm talking about user friendliness. And one of the older solutions in the world of data security, the DLP concept, the data leakage prevention, was notorious for making people hate the system, and eventually it became a white elephant. Our approach is different in a way that it doesn't require people to handle all of those events and tackle all of those miscalculations about what's sensitive and what not, and it becomes quite nice and user-friendly, and people continue working. So that's I think not just to put it on the MSPs, but also on the vendors to develop the right user-friendly solutions that balance security with usability.
Exactly. And the DLP is, that's a great example of it. The old way of approaching it was, all right, somebody was assigned as the DLP officer, and they would have to review all the alerts for anything that might happen. And then they'd have to go down and spend the time to review it. Is that sensitive data or not? Okay, now what are we going to do with it? How are we going to handle it? And that could be 2 hours of somebody's time devoted to just one alert.
Yeah. Very good, very good. So I think the last question over here that I want to tackle, Luis, is how do you see MSPs ensuring third-party vendors, shadow IT, the entire supply chain, question? What do you think about securing that, and how do you see that as a growing threat?
Right. So it's, consequence of work from home and so much of the workloads moving out the cloud. You don't want, if you're a Microsoft house and your clients are a Microsoft house, they shouldn't be using Google Gmail. They shouldn't be using Google Drive. They shouldn't be using Dropbox, probably. And knowing and understanding what data they are using and where it is at can also help you figure out and discover, shadow IT, because shadow IT is just as a big of a concern as legitimate insider threats are, and also external threats, because just not even out of maliciousness, somebody uses a public sharing repository somewhere that they're using Dropbox, but their Dropbox is public. It's a shared link. It's discoverable. People can find it and see whatever information is in there. Well, what information is in there? What kind of information could they have put in there? Those are really big challenges. And even from the third-party vendor point of view, you are in control of what your clients are going to do most of the time with every single third-party vendor they may be using. They're going to have tons of other relationships with other entities that are going to be exchanging information back and forth with them. And since you're not an intimate part of that back and forth, they still might be doing things in an unsecure manner. They may be providing sensitive intellectual property or other information back and forth, and you may be completely blind to it. And
absolutely.
That's a challenge.
Absolutely. That's a challenge. And one of the things we can help with, and we'll explain in a couple of minutes, that we can actually show you which data flows where. So we can identify without any integration what data flows to third-party vendors. So New York DHS or McKesson in the world of healthcare, or your bank account in the world of finance, and separate that from the shadow IT. That those Google in the world of Microsoft, applications or whatever. It could be even a communication channel that people are using, Slack, and it's not sanctioned by the organization. And you can actually see how many files are going out, how much risk is associated with that in US dollars. And you can even see that if the files were encrypted preemptively, they can go out, but nobody can open them. So this is a major part, I think, of the blind spot organizations have. Because if I talk with an MSP and he has a customer, he probably knows that they have sensitive data. He doesn't know how much, where it is, and so on. But definitely, this is a blind spot because you don't have the mechanisms in place. And this is an eye candy for an MSP, because he can show that to the business owner and say, you didn't know how much data you have, but keep in mind that people are taking your data in places you didn't know of, and didn't even conceive that they're doing it.
Yep.
Okay.
And that's a great motivation if you can find that type of information and present it to a smaller business owner, and not like usually they're very adamant about protecting what is theirs, and it usually gets good results.
Absolutely, absolutely. So just to wrap things up, I want to talk for a few minutes about Actifile, what we do, and how we are already integrated with Enable. So first of all, from a technical perspective, Actifile is a multi-tenant managed application partner portal running on top of Microsoft Azure. We have 3 deployment options, one for endpoints, Windows, Mac, the second one for on-prem file repositories, Windows, Linux, NAS, and the third one is for Office 365 across all the different file repositories, Teams, OneDrive, SharePoint, and the email. And we're working also on a deployment option for Google Workspace. So once deployed, we start automatically based on predefined rules that you turn on by turning on security frameworks or regulation. We start scanning, opening files, classifying data according to the content and the origin, and of course the type of file. We start quantifying the risk. So we aggregate files according to classifications, and then we can show you PCI credit cards, you've got $1 million worth of risk. SSNs, you have $500,000 worth of risk. By the way, across probably 10,000, data risk assessments in different customers across our MSP base, the average in the US is about $4.6 million worth of risk, which is not a negligent number in any case. And we immediately start monitoring the flow, what we discussed earlier, seeing what's going in, out, what users, what applications are using it, and uncovering the shadow IT part. Everything is audited, everything is maintained in an audit log off premises of the organization, so you can have it ready and uncompromised in case of a breach. And all of that is done without uploading files to the cloud. So we are not taking any of the customers' files to do the classification on our cloud. We're doing it only on the client side. We're sending to the cloud in a secure way only the statistical level, how many, where they are, and so on. Part number 1. Part number 2, per classification, let's assume you've got $1 million worth of risk in credit cards. You press one button, and now all of the files, whatever file types, wherever they are in the organization, they will be encrypted in a matter of minutes. All the new ones that will be added in the future, this is now on autopilot, will be encrypted in a matter of minutes from their creation, downloaded, copying of other files. And the organization itself internally works transparently, meaning everybody have Actifile on their machine, and that will decrypt the files with no latency, no user password, wherever they are, including offline. And if you need to share this information with external resources that you trust, there are several methods of decrypting and sharing per communication channel, per trusted users that have configurable limit, or by designating a sharing folder. So we can help you identify any type of sensitive data automatically and encrypt it across endpoints, file server, cloud repositories, all of that in real time. And of course, per our discussion, prevent external ransomware or insider threats, help you comply with all the privacy regulations, because once you classify, quantify, and definitely monitor, you're in compliance. But take it, a step further to encrypt or provide data usage anomalies that are very smart, because we're doing the classification and the data risk quantification. I can set a threshold and say, as long as per day or per week there is only $1,000 worth of data leaving the organization, I'm okay with it. That's under the radar. But if I cross the $1,000 per that time period, I want to do something. And last but not least, I want to thank Luis, who has another engagement, that he needs to run to. He's a busy person. Thank you very much, Luis, for your time. I really appreciate it. I will stay on with another 1 or 2 slides and answer people's questions. Thank you very much, Luis. It was a pleasure.
Thank you, Guy. It's been a pleasure. Hope everybody gets something very useful out of today's webinar.
I'm sure. Thank you very much, Luis. So this is how the Actifile UI in our new release looks like. You can see here the numbers we talked about, $1.7 million worth of risk. Already reduced is 78%, 1.3 million. there is a residual risk that you want to take care of, or maybe you made a decision that it's under the radar. You see the risk by device, so there are different devices. You can see top applications that are, dealing potentially shadow IT, device risk, and so on. So really a centralized console, which you can see also in a single pane of glass throughout your customers. And last but not least is our enable integration. So we have already in place and central deployment and monitoring integration. You can see that on the right side here on this screenshot. And we're planning additional integration for those of you who are enabled MSPs in the audience. So report risk by device or file repository. Again, it's very important because we're working across devices that are on premise, workstation, laptops, file servers, and across the cloud. So report the risk by device of a file repository to your RMM and push those data risk alerts that are very smart. They're not per event, they're per grouping of files, classifications, and their associated data risk. So I can set a threshold at $1,000, $10,000, and this is what I care about. I don't care about the number of files, because files can have a lot of risk or very little risk, depending on the type of data they have inside. So report those data risk alerts by push to your PSM or RM once this threshold, which is an eye-driven threshold, is met. This is what Luis and I wanted to cover today. I'm opening the stage, so to speak. Are there any questions, comments, feedback? Love to get it from you. Ron, are there any questions on the Q&A? Okay. It seems like there are no questions. So thank you very much, everyone, for attending our session today. And looking forward to talking to you in future Actifile and or Enable sessions. And thank you very much for your time, and stay safe. Thank you very much, everyone.